You are on the road beyond. I'm Todd Duplantis. Welcome, Facebook Live and YouTube. Thanks for being here tonight. We have got a great show for you. We're going to be talking about history, ghosts, American Revolution, New England, all that and more for the next half hour or so. My co-host tonight, filling in for Ike McFadden, is Scotty Barrett. Scotty, good to see you on the show again.
Todd, it's wonderful to be with you again.
You know, Scotty, I've been a bit of a history buff all of my life. One of my favorite places to visit is Williamsburg. I've also been up to Boston before, and I'm always fascinated with the American Revolution and the history behind it. Tonight, we're going to take our viewers on a bit of a journey up to New England to talk about history and ghosts. How are they entwined?
Oh, this is wonderful. And I want to find out if Sam has talked to any of those ghosts who implemented our revolution.
Well, we're going to be hearing from that. Sam Baltrusis is the author of Ghosts of Boston and Ghosts of Salem. He's penned more than a dozen paranormal books, including Mass Murders and the Ghosts of the American Revolution. He's been featured on several national TV shows, including the Travel Channel, Most Haunted Places, Haunted Towns, and Haunted USA. He's also appeared in Fright Club with the Ghost Brothers and Jack Osborne in Discovery Plus, which is a very good show if you haven't seen that. He's a sought-after lecturer. He's worked for VH1, MTV, Newsweek, and ABC Radio. Sam, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show.
I've got lots of questions for you. You know, I was in Boston a few years ago, and I'd never been to the city before. And I went ahead and I took the little walk where it kind of takes you on the Revolutionary Trail, where you walk and follow history. There just seemed to be so much going on there. I'm originally from New Orleans, so I'm used to old cities, but you don't see something like that, especially when you go to the graveyard, because that's what really stood out to me, was not just looking at the dates on the grave, but the things that were written on the tombstones as well. There's just so much going on there. Yeah, I mean,
you walk the Freedom Trail, and the Freedom Trail goes to some of the most historic locations in Boston, Massachusetts. The cemeteries date back 300 years, go back to the 1600s. So it's amazing to actually go into these living open air museums and just look at the gravestones and the people that came before us.
We have had on our shows before, in Boston being a town on the coast, we've had guests talking about various coastal towns that are seen to be more haunted. I don't know, because of the rich history, or is it because they're located near water? There's also that theory that water somehow conducts paranormal energy. Is this something you found as well in dealing with investigating Boston?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that you find a correlation to water and also to rail tracks of all things. So if there's railroad tracks nearby or a water source, there tends to be a higher ability for hauntings.
When you talk about railroad tracks, you're talking about the metal. Is there some electrical connection with this fourth element, this fourth area of spirituality that you think is significant?
I think that the railroad tracks, for whatever reason, I'm not sure the science behind it. I just know that anecdotally, it's more ghosts and ghost lore near railroad tracks. And do I think that railroad tracks somehow amplify the spirits? Probably, yeah. And same with the water. The water kind of acts as like a conduit and kind of keeps specifically residual hauntings. So hauntings that are like a videotape replay that go over and over again. The water kind of serves as like a videotape replay, and it kind of serves like a reservoir of energy.
I know Scotty mentioned something earlier in the show about checking with you to see if you've had a chance to communicate with any of these fathers of the revolution. I will ask you that. During your investigations, have you had a chance to have these communications or to contact spirits like that?
Yeah, so I'm actually clairvoyant, and so a historian and author of 13 books. I connect with the spirits. So I did. I actually connected with. I went in the footsteps of Benjamin Franklin in Philadelphia and walked the steps that Benjamin Franklin walked. And I went to the cemetery where he was buried and didn't have an experience, but other people did have experiences there. I went to the library where he's said to dance. Apparently his ghost is kind of like a party boy, and was dancing by the library, but I didn't communicate with him there. I did go to the Ben Franklin Museum where there is remains of what was, and he, the whole section where you look into like a glass case and you look down and you can see what was the privy, which is the toilet. And I was looking down at the toilet and I'm like, well, that's kind of interesting that, and I heard a voice behind me go, that's where George Washington relieved himself. But he was a little bit more crass when he said that. And I cracked up. I'm like, who, like that's funny. And I turned around and there was nobody there. So was it Ben Franklin? I mean, he had a potty mouth. So I have a feeling it was Ben Franklin.
Being clairvoyant, that kind of opens up a whole new thing of questions with me, because I'm always interested in how you're approached by spirits, how you communicate. Is it something you actively have to do, or do you have people coming to you all the time being clairvoyant?
Well, I'm currently reporting from New York City right now and working on a project. And also New York City, by the way, has a very storied past when it comes to the American Revolution as well. So like the Morris Jew Mansion, the Conference House in Staten Island. So there's a lot of locations featured in my book in New York City. But when it comes to turning on, turning off, I have a switch where I turn it on when I'm at a location and I turn it off when I don't want to communicate with spirits. So they do come to me, but I've learned how to turn off my abilities when I need to have like rest time or be on a radio show or a TV show.
Because that's something I've always wondered. Yeah, I mean, if you can turn it on and off, I've heard weird stories of people being approached by, or mediums or clairvoyants being approached by unwanted spirits at the worst time.
Yeah, this part of New York City on the Upper West Side right now, there's a lot of energy in this neighborhood. And to give you an idea, Dr. Holzer actually lived right down the street from me. So there's definitely a lot of say residual energy in this part of Manhattan. But yeah, so I do turn it off, but I get approached by energy, especially if it's spirits that want my attention, where I'm just kind of bombarded by them and they kind of make themselves known, whether I like it or not.
Let me ask you this, Sam. Do you find that these spirits have got an ego that requires recognition?
I'm about giving a voice to those who have been traditionally marginalized, whether it is people of color, women. I connect strongly with women. The rich white guy that we read about in the history books, I tend to not connect with. I want to give a voice to those who have been marginalized by society, whether they were accused of witchcraft in 1692 in Salem, or if they were a barmaid in New York City and never really had a voice and they were murdered. I want to talk to those people. So no, I think that the people that I communicate with are definitely more. They're grateful for me to be able to tell their story correctly.
Sam, this is Pete Haviland. This is Pete Haviland. You had mentioned about the Salem witch trials. Have you ever talked to Giles Gorley?
Giles Corey. Yeah, so I was a tour guide in Salem, Massachusetts for about 10 years. I also, in addition to being a historian on Salem, I'm also related to the Putt family, who were the major accusers during the Salem witch trials. So Giles Corey's spirit would not like me because I'm a descendant of the Putnams. Have I encountered his spirit? I think so. Yeah, I have. There's been Giles was pressed to death over a 2-day period. So there's a lot of lingering energy associated with Giles specifically, and I do think that. I also connect with his second wife, Mary Corey, who was buried in the old burying points in the cemetery. And I connect more with her than I do actually with Giles. But they say if you connect with Giles, something bad will happen to Salem or to you. And so I've connected to his energy, but I feel like it's more like a pressing of my chest when I've connected with him. So it's not a good connection.
Let's talk about the Salem witch trials, because one of the books that you've written, of the Ghosts of Salem, are most of the paranormal activity in Salem. Obviously, does it take you back to the witch trials which happened?
Yeah, so I do think that it left a psychic imprint on the land. The land is stained with blood, and the blood was the blood of people I'm related to, and whether they're victims or perpetrators, my family has taught to that, and that's something that I feel like sort of like a modern passion to tell their story and to tell their stories correctly, whether they're Ann Putnam Jr., who was one of the afflicted girls, or the people that she accused. So I do think a lot of the ghosts are tied to the Salem witch trials, but I also think that it kind of left a scar in the land, and everything else after somehow is related to the witch trials. But it's also it's not all witch trials ghosts, but it started from the witch trials.
Do you find has there been something you've learned when communicating with the departed surrounding the witch trials that really shocked you? Something you learned that may not be obvious, that you're like had to take a step back. Could you share something like that with us?
Yeah, I think that there's a concern with the stories and the way that they're told. For example, Bridget Bishop, who was the first to be executed, she has been portrayed in pop culture as like this loose woman who wore red, like kind of lacy garb, kind of sexualized by the Crucible and other pop culture. And she to be known, she wants to be told. So I think that there are victims for their story to be told and told correctly, and that they were innocent men and women. They were not witches. And I think that when people come to Salem and are like, oh, where are the witches? Where are the witches? It offends the spirits, and it offends people like myself who are historians who know that these innocent men and women were actually executed for something that they did not do.
Sam, are they seeking revenge? Is there a revenge factor?
Good question. If they're going to seek revenge, they're going to seek it out with someone like myself, who is related to the bad guy. But yeah, I do think that that there are a few of the victims that do want postmortem justice. And Giles Corey is a good example of someone who I do think is sticking around because he's very angry. And I would be angry too if I was pressed to death over a 2-day period, and I would stick around and haunt the land.
Yeah, and they used to put stones on them, didn't they?
Yeah. My question is, does this anger manifest in a physical action?
Yeah, so I have been out in the field. I've actually been with someone who is a descendant of Elizabeth, who's one of the victims. She got bit while I was channeling one of the spirits. There's an anger. She got bit. She got bit by something like an unseen force. So I do think that maybe in Salem that it may not be the actual victims, that it may be what we call a thought form or a tulpa. And a thought form is where you talk about it so much, it kind of creates a manifestation of a ghost. And I think that may be the case in Salem.
It sounds like you had a lot of experiences there in Salem. Has there been a time where you had something that literally just shocked you and literally scared the hell out of you working on something in Salem?
Yeah, so I'm an immersion journalist, so I like to actually work and live where I write when I write a book on a location. So I actually worked at a hotel in Salem during 2016. I worked the overnight shift at a new hotel, and I saw what looked like a black mass in the lobby area until one night. And this was like off season, so it was January of like 2017 actually. And then the black mass actually goes into the elevator, and the buttons go, and it actually goes down to the basement. And I'm like, what the heck is that? But I actually follow downstairs. And what's interesting about the basement, you have to hit a special code to go down to the basement. So I'm like, there's got to be something explainable, like that's going on here. Like maybe someone making a joke on me. I don't know. So I go down to the basement, and then I hear what sounds like a moaning sound and like someone banging metal. Then I think maybe there's something, like there's a store right next to the hotel that maybe someone's breaking into the hotel and they were just trying to get me away from the front. So I run outside. I see the thing that terrifies me still to talk about it, a shadow figure in the bookstore next to the hotel with red glowing eyes. And that happened early 2017, and the entity has stalked me ever since. So when you asked about revenge, I think that entity is looking for some sort of revenge of some sort.
And this is the story, the classic story you hear when you are investigating something and a piece of it comes home with you. This is something that's obviously still to this day playing a role in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't go back to Salem like I used to because of this stalker. I do think that there's a part of me that feels like that it's interdimensional, and there's another part of me that feels like that it's a former, that it was a human at one point, but it's kind of took on after years and years of repression and just is turned into like a monster after death. So yeah, I don't go to Salem nearly as much as I used to. I used to give tours pretty much every day, and I worked in Salem, and I haven't since COVID because of the lockdown, but also too because of the stalker.
You know, Sam, we also hear a lot on the past 6 weeks or so on our shows. We hear about a reoccurring entity known as the Trickster. Do you think this entity could be something like that?
Yeah, so it's definitely a shape-shifting entity, and I would say that it's more aligned with what we call the man with the hat. It wears a hat and has red glowing eyes. But I also think it could have been someone that from the 1600s, the late 1600s, because the attire is from that era. So it could be someone trying to play off they know that I have guilt, and this entity has expressed that it wants my energy. So it's kind of like feeding off my fear and off my energy, and I don't want to give them that fear or energy anymore. So in that sense, it may be like the Trickster, where it's trying to feed off my guilt, and knowing that I have a lot of guilt associated with the Salem witch trials.
We've been talking with Sam Baltrusis. He is a clairvoyant author, and you can check out all of his books. Sam, your website, where can people find you and your books on the web?
So it's my name. So Sam Baltrusis, BALTUSIS.com.
Sam, we've loved talking with you tonight. Thank you for being here and sharing some of these stories, and we appreciate you joining us.
Thank you guys for having me on. It was great.
Thank you. So Pete and Scotty, Scotty, you haven't been on the past few shows, but Pete, once again, we're getting this reoccurring theme of the Trickster. We've heard about it possibly being, shapeshifters, black-eyed kids, maybe the Mothman, and here an entity that's been following Sam around for years. That's terrifying.
I'm working on somebody right now that will talk to us about shadow people. Especially the hatted man. His name is Mike Ricksecker, and I'm working on the date.
Scotty, with all the guests we've had on the show in the past several months, we've really the Trickster is some entity that appears, and it could take the shape of several different popular characters. The Hat Man,
a gnome, for example.
What's that?
A gnome, for example.
A gnome. Well, there you go. A gnome, leprechauns. And it's been a reoccurring theme. And people think, oh, that's just something that people are making up. Well, the reality is, you've got hundreds of people who could come forward at any time and relate these.
The same account.
It's the same type of story, maybe a different type of figure, but it's happening to them. It's happening to them in shape or form.
Yeah, and it may manifest itself in different ways to different people, but it indeed manifests itself. Interesting, very interesting.
Yeah, and him being clairvoyant, just opens up a whole new can of worms when you're talking about these entities, because he has more of a connection with them, especially with the Salem witch trials. Some of the stories he had were very fascinating, especially his connection.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, we are going to move on to our news section. Here's a look at some of the weird, tantalizing, and just plain bizarre stories we've posted from our partners at the Full Spectrum Project on Facebook. Pete Haviland, familiar with them?
Yeah, I know them pretty well. There's some nice guys over there.
Some nice guys posting these stories. All right, so we've got a story that basically, once again, a reoccurring theme. Scotty, if you've been watching some of the shows, we've talked about the government report on UFOs. They're now calling them UAPs. They've kind of changed the name. They say, no mention that these could be aliens. They're more along the lines of just highly technical and advanced drones. That's kind of
right. Sure.
Yeah. That's what they're saying.
That's right.
Well, I've got some interesting pictures that came to us from the dailystar.com. And this was an aircraft that was spotted over Georgia, the state of Georgia. That's right. They didn't go into technicalities. But what they found was this appeared to be some type of unknown vehicle being chased by jets. And there's some intriguing pictures of these, but this just goes back to the whole thing that there are things in our skies that no one seems to explain, especially the government when you put them behind it with a team of experts in their reports. So just more information you found. And if you check out the Full Spectrum Project on Facebook, you can find this story from the dailystar.com. Scotty, I'm going to ask you, what's your take on this whole government UAP report?
Everything dates back to Roswell. And was it a weather balloon, or was it really a flying saucer? I tend to believe the latter. I tend to believe, yes, there was a flying saucer. It was confiscated, and that is part of the whole creation of what was going on in Area 51 and beyond with regard to back engineering this technology.
Right.
We haven't gotten it right yet, quite frankly.
Well,
if we had, we would be farther ahead.
Well,
gravity, for example.
Well, the media reported the Roswell incident, and Pete, you could maybe correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the media first reported this not as a balloon that crashed, as a UFO, and they quoted
a flying saucer.
And they quoted, government officials. And all of a sudden the government said, oh, wait a second here. That wasn't a UFO. It was actually a balloon. And those weren't aliens. They were dummies, because everybody knows balloons fly around in skies and drop with dummies attached to them.
Yeah, they were talking about being Project Mogul when they put out that last report a few years ago. Thing is, though, this Project Mogul happened 5 years after Roswell.
Yeah. He's right. You're right. Yeah.
Well, and it goes back, though, when we're going once again talking about the recent UAP report. One thing they did point out in the report, and we've talked about this on the show, is they acknowledged the fact that there are unknown things out in our skies. They acknowledge the fact that these could be civil defense or national defense threat. It's a problem for us. They don't acknowledge where they come from. All they say, it could be other. We all know it's not China or Russia. So Pete is more under the impression that these are drone technology that we're actually behind. They just aren't claiming it. I'm thinking they just don't want to come forward and say, you know what, guys, there's things out there. We just can't protect you against them.
Pete? We just don't know.
Yeah, we just don't know. I mean, isn't that are you more along the lines of this is technology that we have?
I'm thinking that I'm actually thinking it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, a little bit of both.
I think it's a little bit of both.
Well, one way or another, it was a major report that came out a few weeks ago. If you haven't had a chance to read it, you may want to go take a look at it. 11 pages, 3 of those are a cover page and indices, and then you've got 6 pages of a real report, which is a bunch of nothing. So there you go.
At least it's not redacted, and you just get like a and and a the.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
We'll see, folks. Scotty, we want to thank you for being on the show and filling in for Ike. We appreciate you joining us. Maybe we can get you out there and doing a little bit of reporting for us in the future.
I would be honored.
All right. Scotty Barrett filling in for the is Ike on assignment this week? Pete, have you heard from him?
Last time I heard from him, he was saying something about they're chasing me, and then the phone went dead.
Was there a taser sound in the background? Okay.
It was a crackle. I don't know.
All right. He'll be back next week, then. All right, folks. We're going to wrap up another episode of The Road Beyond. Scotty, thank you for being here. Pete, we'll see you next week, right?
Yes, sir. I will be here.
All right. Thank you all for joining us. Remember to find us on Facebook and Twitter as The Road Beyond Podcast. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Same thing, The Road Beyond Podcast on YouTube. Watch us live there and on Facebook. And make sure you follow us in social media. I'm Todd Duplantis. I'll see you next week. Have a great one.